We'll bring you the midday update, including the fallout from Rishi Sunak's press conference declaring no ifs, no buts. They're going to sit through the night. MPs and peers will just keep on voting until the Rwanda bill passes. He wants flights to take off in 10 to 12 weeks, he said. Airfields have been booked. Courts and judges are on standby. So we'll take a look at the midday update. Obviously, it's all a big part of the Prime Minister's re-election hopes. But what will you do if you get to the election, you still can't pick a candidate? In fact, you dislike them all. What can you do in that situation? Well, a new petition on the Parliament website is calling for the ballot papers to be changed to include a none-of-the-above category. And Jamie Stanley's been running the campaign for none of the above since 2010 and joins me now. Hi, Jamie.
Hello, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm very good. I'm very good. So tell me what the purpose of this campaign is.
Okay, so, 2010 is a long time ago now. I was very personally, disaffected by the political system, wasn't really that interested. And just because I didn't really think I was represented. And I looked into it and I thought, well, surely it should be possible to register that so that people know I'm not apathetic. It's not because I didn't care. It's because I didn't feel represented. I didn't think any of the major two parties represented me, and I didn't think any of the other parties could get in. It's essentially a two-horse race in the UK, as most people realise. But, I thought, well, hang on, surely it should be possible to register that. And so I started the campaign. And, of course, the whole idea is that, if like me, you want to register that formally, you should be able to. I think, personally, in a true democracy, you should be able to register a withholding of consent and a rejection of all that's on offer if you don't feel represented in a way that carries the same weight as a vote. So if enough people did it in a constituency, if more people voted against all of the candidates, then that would obviously affect the result. Our proposal has always been that should be no difference if an MP steps down or dies. You have basically a 6-month logistical kind of planning period before a by-election. So I just think that would be democracy in action. And I think, in the current climate, I think that's needed more than ever, personally.
So if in a constituency none of the above wins, you say there should be another by-election, but without any of the people who were on offer the first time?
Well, I don't know. Not necessarily. I think the key thing is that if all parties are being rejected by a majority of voters, then that gives the parties pause for thought, doesn't it? I wouldn't necessarily argue that they would need to be barred from standing, but I think the parties would have to get their house in order. They'd have to recognise, why are these people voting against? Why are so many people rejecting all of us at once? Is it the party in question? Is it the system as a whole? We need to represent these people. So the knock-on effect of it ought to be that more people would be represented, so you'd maximise the common good. We wrote a white paper about this, which is on our website, NOTA UK.org, if people are interested, where we've covered all those kind of bases, basically. We just think it would maximise the common good if more people were represented. And also, NOTA wouldn't necessarily have to win a constituency. If it came second or third, the parties that have come behind, none of the above, surely, that would still give them, pause for thought. It's a grave concern. If more people are rejecting us than voting for us or anybody, clearly there's an issue. It's not about disengagement. It's about, maximising the common good and representing more people.
What about the counter-argument is that you can't get exactly what you want in a parliamentary democracy, that actually you do have to compromise a bit. You do have to weigh up which of these parties on offer is the closest to what I would like to see. We have an incredibly broad offer, particularly at general elections, when you could have, Reform, the Conservatives on one side, you have Labour, you've got the Greens, you often have the Socialist standing, Socialist Workers' Party. So there's a broad spectrum there. Don't we have to make a decision rather than saying, I don't like any of those, because everyone could just keep doing that and we wouldn't have a government. In the end, we do have to say, of these options laid before me, this is my preference.
So my argument to that would be that what you're talking about essentially is lesser evilism. And the problem with that, two things. Firstly, in this country, because it's a two-horse race, there's only actually two parties that can ever wield any real power in government, whether with an outright majority or in coalition, and that's the Tories or Labour, because of the nature of the voting system. But also, there are certain issues.
Well,
I think where
except that within the last 15 years, we've twice had a hung parliament where smaller parties have held sway over the bigger parties. The DUP with Theresa May, the Lib Dems under and David Cameron.
Sure, yeah, but even so, though, less for evilism, you're still voting for evil. On certain big issues, a lot of people, for example, at the moment, would argue that if you're fundamentally opposed to what the International Criminal Court of Justice calls plausible genocide in Gaza committed by Israel, then, how could you with clear conscience vote for any party or indeed any party in a system that seems unable to actually actively oppose that and try and stop it, which is the situation we have in this country, which is why I say more than ever,
no, it is.
The ability to formally reject that is possible.
We've got George Galloway's party standing. He's clearly has a very strong position on Gaza, and he won in a by-election. My point is that you can't have a situation where the only way you can have absolutism, not have less of the two evils, is that the only way you can have a candidate who you completely agree with on everything is if you are the candidate. You always have to compromise.
But NOTA isn't about that, respectfully. It's literally, to me, it's fundamental to democracy to be able to withhold consent, because voting is about consent. When you vote, you're consenting to be governed by whoever wins, even if your choice doesn't win, and that's fair enough. That's democracy in action. But equally, you need to also be able to formally withhold your consent if none of them represent you and you don't feel represented. At the moment, if you don't vote, you're just written off as being apathetic. If you spoil your ballot paper, they're counted, but they're not actually counted as process votes. They can be lumped in with those spoiled in error. So there's actually no way of measuring how many people are absolutely disillusioned with all of the parties and the system as a whole. And they should be able to do that in a true democracy. It's not a true democracy if you're not able to do that. And we're not saying that everybody should do that and reject everything and not vote. We're simply saying that if you actually are pro-democracy, you must be able to do that. Otherwise, how can it be a true democracy? Otherwise, you're just written off as disengaging or apathetic when you're not.
But what happens if none of the above wins in every seat?
I mean, well, then you'd have to have another general election, I suppose, but it wouldn't happen.
Okay, but what happens then if no? But no, but if you're going to change the voting system, you have to imagine all possibilities. What happens if none of the above keeps on winning? What do you do then?
Well, then the parties won't have learned their lesson, will they? That's democracy in action.
Yeah. So what happens then?
If it wins in a constituency? Well, the parties, but then people would come back to them, wouldn't they? If they actually were representing them, people would come back to them. People wouldn't vote none of the above forever if they felt represented. That's the whole point. But the option should be there. You should have that right to do it in a democracy.
But we'll see what happens. But this parliament. Well, I mean, I think there are probably practical issues, and I think personally, the idea that you have to agree with every single. The whole point of a parliamentary democracy is that you have to make a decision based on what is in front of you. And I think there's a point. If you have none of the above, you just encourage people to disengage from that and just say, well, I don't agree with that particular thing, so I'm going to disengage from the process altogether.
Well, I don't think it would encourage people necessarily to do that. I just think it would give people that feel that way actual representation finally, which you could argue that that's the silent majority in this country, or it might not be. But the point is that if the parties realised that was happening and there was a threat of that and there was a potential for that, then they have the potential to actually change and represent more people and find out why people feel like that in the first place.
But
surely
how would they? So say there's a constituency and none of the above wins. What do the Conservatives, Reform, Lib Dems, Greens, Socialist Workers' Party, Labour? How do they change? Do they go to the left? Do they go to the right?
Well, that would depend. They'd have to canvass the people that are voting none of the above. I mean, I'd love to give my views on it, but I'm very clear that this campaign has to be politically neutral. And a lot of people argue that it would favour the left or it would favour the Tories or whatever because only the people on the left would use it or whatever. But I actually think there are people from all political stripes and all sides and all factions who are very disillusioned and find it hard to actually, in clear conscience, put a cross next to their usual, party of choice, including a lot of Conservatives at the moment. So I don't think it would favour anybody in particular. But what the point is that if people did that, then the parties would have to find out why. They'd have to ask them why. They'd have to canvass them and hopefully evolve and represent more people and therefore maximise the common good is the whole point of the campaign.
Jamie, good to speak to you. Really appreciate you coming on today. Jamie Stanley from the None of the Above campaign. And that petition, which is running on the Parliament website, is there right now.